Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the presentations. It's great to be here. I'd like to take us in a little different direction. I'd like to take us into a broader understanding of what climate means. Like, climate isn't just temperature and precipitation. Climate is also policy. Climate is also funding. Climate is also regulation and public perception. So let's go through that, because I think that we've got some idea. I've got an idea of what we could do to sort of set up forage agriculture for the future. Before I get going, yes, I might just get into some things that are just a little controversial. So it's important that you know that this is my opinion. It is informed by research, not necessarily that of my employer. And I'm not that kind of a doctor, right? I didn't stay at Holiday Inn Express last night, so if I say something that sounds vaguely medical, please don't treat it as medical advice, but I am happy to help you find literature to help you make informed decisions when you go to your own physician, right? Because that's kind of the role that I've grown into. So I do think that we in forage agriculture have a really good story. I think we've got the best story going. I don't think we've been very good at telling it. And I think that we have real opportunities, and it's all kinds of things we've been hearing about it, the resilience of forage-based agriculture as opposed to commodity agriculture. The benefits to soil health and watershed health and all these others, they're great stories, and for the most part, the public doesn't know it. So I think we have a real opportunity. Because maybe it's just me, maybe, but I seem to be picking up on a little anti-animal agriculture message that's coming at us. And it seems to never stop. It just maybe recycles every once in a while. And it's obviously primarily focused at ruminant animal agriculture, which therefore would be forage agriculture, although I find it interesting they don't attack the horses. Right? In the United States, we've got more horses than dairy cattle, but maybe they know enough not to attack the horses yet. Right? Maybe I'm just being conspiratorial. I don't know. So you hear lots of facts, quote unquote, confidently asserted, poorly documented is my shorthand. If you hear anyone say that, cattle produce more emissions than all of transportation or some version of that, then you should know by now that that was basically a single statement from a summary in Livestock's Long Shadow, which was then recalculated because they were unfairly comparing life cycle analysis for the livestock to tailpipe emissions for transportation. And so when they redid it, they come up with slightly different numbers. The latest numbers from EPA in the United States are agriculture, 9% of greenhouse gas emissions, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, 9% for agriculture, 4% for livestock agriculture, which by my reckoning means that the plant agriculture is producing more. Okay? Don't hear that much. And then beef is 2%. Okay. So again, and transportation is like 28% in the United States. And it would be different overseas, and we can talk about that. But notice how the conversation frequently includes human health aspect. And that's based on some assumptions, that's based on some policy, that was based on some decisions that were made, right, that say that eating red meat is not only bad for the planet, but it's bad for you. Is that true? And it's kind of interesting, the things that aren't talked about. Like 2% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are due to the beef industry, while 10% are coming from the healthcare industry. How are those trade-offs calculated into the discussion of sustainability? What kinds of dietary impacts are used in the sustainability models? Is there room for change? And of course, we know these kinds of figures about increase in human population by mid-century, the need for more food. Now that can come from reducing food waste, and it must, but it does also mean more production of food. It also is going to be accompanied by a significant increase in demand for animal protein by 2050. And what's happening to farmland? Are we producing more of it? Or are we losing it due to development and degradation? So this is the challenge that's coming at us. That's only 32 years. I was playing Remember When, watching all the graduate students give their excellent presentations and remembering what it was like for me when I came here. 32 years is your productive lifetime, right? I won't be here. That's just the odds. But what about the people that are just entering the profession? So my thesis is that we can't feed today's world without ruminant animal agriculture, let alone the world of 2050. Okay, that's against a narrative, but I think we can defend that. And so if we're going to do that, though, we have to improve productivity and efficiency, not just in North America, but worldwide. And we can talk about specific things, but in general, just as we had to have a green revolution as I was entering the field, maybe I was a couple decades after that, but that was about avoiding starvation. What's it going to take to feed a population that's growingly prosperous? Or, put it another way, what's it going to take to produce a diet that will foster flourishing and prosperity? So we need a ruminant revolution. Okay? Thank you for laughing. The reality, though, in the United States is we're increasingly separate audiences, right, between the producer and the consumer. We've got more people locked up in the United States than we have that are primary operators of farms. There's a whole lot wrong with that. Okay, and in fact, to be a farmer by these statistics, you just have to sell $1,000 worth of goods off your property, so that's a good hobby, and I'm all for it. But, 70% of that 2.1 million farmers make less than 25% of their household income from the farm. So we're talking more like 500,000 versus 2.2 million, right? So, but everybody eats. Everybody eats, and the rate of chronic illness in the United States impacts virtually everyone. 60% of adult Americans have one or more chronic illnesses, 12% have 5 or more. Over 50% of adult Americans have diabetes or prediabetes, and that's determined with really bad metrics, which we can talk about. So I've been given the opportunity that about 10 years ago, I was a 52-year-old balding, obese pre-diabetic. Today I'm just balding. And it's not a miracle. And the way that happened was by following a dietary policy that's virtually 180 degrees different than all our public policy messages. So that got me interested. And that got me looking, and that got me attending conferences like this as a group of speakers from one of these conferences, where you have to introduce yourself and say, first of all, what's an agronomist? Second of all, what's forage? What's a ruminant? And then what the heck are you doing here? So I get to introduce people. Physicians get continuing medical education credits for coming to listen to me teach them about the essential roles of ruminant animals. God bless America. And there are several, and we could go through all of these. Some of these have been very much emphasized within our industry. Some have been completely neglected. And I really think we need to take a look at this, but the point is that this is a contact point. This is something, I think, that can help us grow support for what we wish to achieve if we're talking about a worldwide effort. Because remember, the Green Revolution was not just public funding. It was private and public. How are we going to do that? Just asking the question. So, again, there are ways to reach people, right? So, reach them with a message like true health food comes from ruminants. We can rebrand them as fermented plant products. It's true, right? Right? Thank you. Okay. So, when I was young, back when I was going through graduate school, BC, before cell phones, malnourishment looked a little different, right? I was still in the shadow of Paul Ehrlich and all that stuff. Okay, so today, we've got somewhere around 800 million human beings in the world that are calorically starved. They're not getting enough energy. Just starvation. That's a shame, a scandal. We can do better, we should do better, but a lot of this is politics. A lot of this is conflict, a lot of this is other issues than just agronomy 101, but it's an issue. We've got 2.2 billion human beings in the world that are overweight or obese. What if both of those are symptoms of malnourishment? We're not used to looking at obesity as malnourishment. In this country, we're real used to labeling that as some sort of character flaw. What if that's not right? Okay, anybody talks about how we need to be eating plant-based diets? Humanity is already eating a plant-based diet, right? Majority of our calories are coming from plants, and in the United States, certainly they're coming from, poor sources of energy from plants. And if you look worldwide, in the case of protein in humanity's diet, the majority of protein is coming from plant sources. So let's just do a quick refresher course. If I could give you two diets that you would serve to someone, and one was entirely providing calories from plant sources, and one was entirely providing the same amount of calories from animal sources, would they have the same metabolic effect on the human beings you were feeding? Yes or no? Sorry? Thank you. And if we could do 2 different or 4 different diets where we looked at protein and we looked at minerals, and we could provide equal amounts of both in 2 different diets, animal source and plant source, would they have the same metabolic effect on human beings that you fed them to? Yes or no? No, they would not. And then this question of vitamins. Is the vitamin requirement that we have influenced by the diet we're eating, or is it independent of diet? It's influenced by the sources. So that leaves a really interesting question. Virtually everything we think we know about human nutrition is based on the idea that the majority of our calories need to be coming from carbohydrates. Is that true? Do we have any evidence of human beings prospering on diets where the majority of their calories were not coming from carbohydrates? The answer is yes, we do have that evidence. But for a number of reasons, we've gone down a certain track. So just please remember that policy and science are not the same thing. And it's a good lesson to keep in mind. And so here is just what the protein sources in humanity's diet look like. Animal sources are somewhere around 38%, which is a little less than what cereals provide. Cereals are not a good source of protein for human nutrition. They're good for calories, and if you're starving, you have one problem. But once you get sufficient calories, then we need to be thinking about what you should be eating. Ruminants are providing somewhere around 15% of protein in humanity's diet. If we get rid of ruminants, what's the alternative? Can we produce sufficient to make it up? I don't think so. And it's not just a United States phenomenon. This is happening around the world. And in a remarkably short period of time, this is just one example from Brazil, where in 1975 they had the 9th largest population of underweight men. By 2014, they were number 3. That's not a trend you'd want, behind China and the United States. And 1 in 3 children now are overweight, and something like 1 in 5 in Brazil are obese. And we can see the same situation happening in other countries. South Africa has a remarkable rate of obesity, for example. So diabetes is the chronic disease that's most clearly linked to diet. I'll talk about some others that are a little controversial, but there's good data behind it. The Director General of the World Health Organization in 2016 described it as a slow motion disaster, which she predicted we had 0 chance of avoiding. That's the best you got to offer. It's the most common cause of leg amputations worldwide. Every 30 seconds, someone in the world loses a lower limb due to the standard of care for diabetes. Total annual cost of diabetes is $825 billion. Again, this is just quote-unquote diabetes. There are other diseases involved here. 60% global costs are borne by low-income, middle-income countries. Is this being factored into the conversation of sustainability? And what happens if plant-based diets for people with diabetes are manifestly a bad idea? Death is inevitable, but a life of protracted ill health is not. Chronic disease prevention and control helps people to live longer and healthier lives, World Health Organization. What does that take? This was remarkable when I saw it. The yellow bars represent the chronic diseases. The blue bars represent the infectious diseases, starting closest to me with HIV/AIDS. Tuberculosis is next. Malaria is after that. Cardiovascular disease is that big orange bar in the middle, followed by cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, diabetes. As we get better and better at helping our brothers and sisters escape poverty, live longer, other conditions come into play. Are we taking that into account as we make these calculations and projections and models? So this is one audience where I don't need to explain Liebig's barrel, right? Good. Okay. So here's Liebig's barrel. We're all familiar with it. I take it and use it as a model for public health, in which the short stave today, I'm convinced, is chronically elevated insulin. That condition is now associated plausibly with a whole range of conditions. Now, once we take care of the 80%, something else shows up, right? We understand that. But let's at least address the 80%. Or put it another way, making confident statements about something in that 20%, I find really suspect. Because we have such a strong signal from the one effect we haven't taken into account yet. It's got to confound everything else we're looking at. And here's a recent paper, Crofts 2015. Biological systems, disease states affected by hyperinsulinemia. Chronically elevated insulin, cancer, circulatory diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, endocrine disorders, nervous disorders, skeletal disorders, urinary disorders. There's a whole number of diseases now that are plausibly linked if we haven't actually established a causal relationship with chronically elevated insulin. So, what dietary macronutrient in the human diet raises insulin? Is it fat? Is it protein? Yeah, but it also raises glucagon, and it raises glucagon a little bit more, so it's probably good in the... How about carbohydrate? Okay, so the macronutrient people in this condition probably want to be most concerned about is carbohydrate. Anyone familiar with PCOS? That's pretty clearly related to hyperinsulinemia. I know none of my brothers in the room would be interested in erectile dysfunction, but just in case you know somebody, that also is related to... Sorry. So here I'm going to go from preaching to meddling. If any of these sound familiar to you, please pay attention. I'm not hitting this and it's working. Abdominal obesity, a waist circumference of over 40 inches in men, over 35 inches in women. If you have elevated triglycerides, if you have depressed HDL cholesterol, if you have an elevated blood pressure, if you have elevated fasting blood glucose. Okay, got those? Any of those obtained for you, 3 out of 5 of those, per this authority, you qualify as having a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. You are at a significantly increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, okay, over somebody who doesn't. These are symptoms of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, hyperinsulinemia. Okay, what if you only have 2? What if you have 1? None of those are good, and there's a diet that if these are obtaining, then you should probably think about looking at some form of restricted carbohydrate diet. So anybody who's gone to their doctor recently, and if your doctor has talked to you about high cholesterol without mentioning triglycerides specifically, you should now know that they're 30 years out of date. If they talk to you about bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, you should know they're only 20 years out of date. If they talk to you about modified LDL particles, they're only 10 years out of date, and today we should be talking about triglycerides, we should be talking about non-HDL cholesterol, we should be talking about insulin resistance. People are now talking about heart disease starting in the liver with insulin resistance. People are now talking about Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes. So if any of that's new information, when I speak to beef industry, I ask them, why should it be a forage agronomist that brought you that news? But why should it be a forage agronomist that brings it to any audience? What's wrong? If that's all factual information, and it is, I'm happy to share my sources, then why should that be news to anybody? And then how do we kind of take a step back and say, how do we make the food that arguably should be a bigger part of our diet available and accessible and affordable to more and more people? And how do we do that in a way that's environmentally responsible? And how do we get more people interested in this to support the work that needs to happen in order to see this? One thing, if anyone says, yeah, but you're not that kind of a doctor, let me just point out that those of us working in animal nutrition and veterinary medicine have tools available to us that human nutritionists and human medical doctors will never have. Thank you. There are ethical questions involved, not the least of which is it's hard to find volunteers to be sacrificed at the end of the study to determine body composition. So the greatest wealth is health. Take-home message, we can have healthy soils and healthy people thanks to ruminants in the face of an opposing message that's coming at us. And again, this is something that we need to think about how we do this worldwide. There are huge issues. I don't mean to oversimplify, but it's the only time I got. So I want to try to get the attention, and I want to get more people interested in this outside of agriculture as well as within agriculture. What would happen? What would happen if the paradigm we've been operating under were completely wrong and a whole new one should be adopted? How might that shift the conversation about funding and research priorities and policy? So I thank you for the opportunity. You can reach me in any number of ways. Look for Ballerstedt. But this is my email, this is my business Twitter, but you can find me all over social media. If I can be of any help, if you want slides, if you want sources, if I can help you in your programs, please, please, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for your attention.
About a diet with red meat makes you happier. I was hoping that would lead to a news storm, and it didn't. But perhaps you might look for it and add it to your presentation.
Thank you.
What role do you see grass-fed and finished beef playing in this paradigm?
The question was, what role do I see grass-fed and finished beef, and I would assume other animal products playing in this? And from my perspective, at this point, that's not part of the 80%. I'm very glad that there are options available to consumers. I've been unimpressed by the health claims and the data that's offered to support them.
Peter, how do you assess the ways in which the diets that are observed in the world's blue zones compare with your perspective here? So in the blue zones, at least as I understand them, the emphasis seems to be on relatively small amounts of meat, some dairy, mostly in the form of cheese, but mostly vegetables, grains, fruit. Yet these people have few of the metabolic diseases you're talking about. They live to 103, 105. Now, they are active, and they're socially involved right up until those late ages. But furthermore,
So the question is around the whole phenomenon of blue zone observations. And I would offer in short form that they eat a lot more meat than's been reported. Okinawa, for example, is very fond of pork. And it's a similar thing that we see in the United States when you go back far enough and you look at food disappearance data. Food disappearance data is built around that food which entered commerce, less waste, less exports. Well, if you've got a population that's primarily agrarian, they're producing a lot of their meat locally. It never enters into commerce, so it looks like, so there's a lot of confounding that's going on. But that would be a quick answer to that. And clearly there's genetic differences, so we know that. So it's a compounding variable.
We can transition to the discussion time. So now we can open to any of the speakers. Most of them are still in the audience.
Oh, come on up here. Please.
But I'd like Alan maybe to participate in this. I mean, it is true that animal agriculture has some negative effects on the environment, and we have to acknowledge that. So, and certainly some of this has been modeled in some of Alan's work here in terms of manure management and nitrogen management and so forth. Can you comment on that a little bit in terms of particularly forages, because forages are a big part of that.
I guess my comment would be to repeat that everything we're going to do to produce food and process it, distribute it, and consume it is going to have an impact. And yes, absolutely agreed that nutrient management is a huge issue. All of these, and I hope I didn't give the idea that I was denying any of that. But on the other side of that, is if we've got 200 people a day in the United States losing some portion of their limb due to diabetes care, how do we model that against whatever it is we're looking at? How do we model the diminished lives of people in terms of lifespan and the impact on their... So again, I think we've tended to get too drilled down too quickly, but I would point out that in some conversations, the application of technology within the United States in livestock agriculture has diminished its footprint relative to some of the extensive forms that we see in other parts of the world. So there are ways and tools that we'll need to deploy to make that footprint as little as possible.
More people to develop countries, because I think that the underdeveloped countries need the more expensive source of protein, and therefore issues the distribution in the developed countries that are doing all that to underdeveloped countries.
No, I think this, sorry, bad human, no donut. So the question was about emerging economies versus others where meat or animal protein, and I shouldn't be too bovine-centric here, but so fish, poultry, eggs, dairy, red meat, pork, it's all part of the animal protein. So it is more expensive, and that's the challenge. How do we get that kind of food into the hands of people who need it, because clearly they're suffering the effects of eating a species inappropriate diet to a large extent. We're seeing an explosion of obesity. We will soon see the explosion in diabetes that follows about 10 years later in Brazil, for example. So it's an issue and it's a challenge, but I think that I'm optimistic about people, once they see the problem and they catch the vision, then we find solutions. And so maybe my role is just to stand up in front of a group and wave their hands enough to get people to try to start thinking down that track, and what it would take to, how do you get shelf-stable products that you can buy and just consume that are animal products, that don't need refrigeration, these things. That's one of the advantages of carbohydrates, right? You can just go grab it and go. But just because you can eat it doesn't mean you should. So that would one answer.
Just a comment on you're saying people need fewer carbohydrates that they're consuming, and in regard to pasture, grass-fed sheep, we know ruminants don't need any grain, right? They can perfectly well make a living on grassland, and there's a lot of this country that shouldn't be plowed that can be used for animal agriculture. So I think what you're saying really reverberates to the ruminants. That's eating corn.
So the comment was about the feeding of concentrates in the form of grain to ruminants. My only pushback would be that while it is true that obviously ruminants do well on grassland, 20 million years worth of experience would suggest that, we're probably always going to have some form of a hybrid system, if only to use byproducts from other things. And as with everything, it's a question of balance and getting things right. I like to point out to audiences that there's this very nice ecological meshing between humans and ruminants. That there's no such, that there are essential amino acids in the human diet. There's no such thing as an essential amino acid in a ruminant's diet. There's essential fatty acids in a ruminant's diet. There's no such thing apparently as an essential fatty acid in a ruminant's diet. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate in a human's diet. There are, however, two forms that are essential in a ruminant's diet. They have to have both structural and non-structural carbohydrates in the right balance in order for the rumen to function properly. It's almost like we kind of developed together no, I'm just being crazy. But point taken, absolutely.
How do you recommend we change the public's perception on their dietary habits?
How do I suggest we help the public change their perspective was the question. I guess my answer is, first of all, let's make sure that we're educated. And I have books that I recommend. If you haven't read Nina Teicholz's book, The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet, I recommend it highly. We gave away, well, we didn't give away, and I didn't certainly. We sold 4 cartons of those books at a series of Virginia Forage and Grassland winter meetings. Yeah, it's like playing t-ball, right? But so that's the story of how we came to believe that saturated fat in the diet was a health hazard. And it's really interesting to read. There's another book called Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It by Gary Taubes, Taubes. He's written 3 books on diet, but this one focuses on the question of obesity. And so I recommend any of his books, and I recommend the book by Nina Teicholz. I also follow primarily Doctors Michael and Mary Dan Eads, E-A-D-E-S, books called Protein Power. That's what I mostly follow, and it's been tweaked over the years. So once we get ourselves educated, some people would rather watch a sermon than listen to one, and so I'm trying to keep that in mind. But if you find yourself having been described and you have this dramatic health change, people watch. What are you doing? It's a chance for a conversation. We belong to groups of people in our communities. We belong to schools, whatever. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with people when you hear other narratives be raised. And it gives us a chance to maybe push back a little bit. When I go to potlucks, I make sure I bring cheese sticks, I bring beef sticks, I bring nuts, okay? I mean, I better not be bringing cupcakes, you know what I mean? So then there's the way to model the behavior as well. And then I would encourage people, I need to see, so I recruit for a group I call the Ruminati. And these are people who understand the value of ruminant animals in ecosystems and the value of their products in human health. And I'm trying to introduce my agricultural tribe to my nutrition tribe. And I'm looking for ideas about how we can bring them together into one place so that we can have bigger conversations and learn from each other. I tried.
Yes, we tried. It seems that they were more comfortable where they were. But yeah. I think it would probably be more visible so people would be more excited about asking questions.
You can continue to ask. It's all good.
Ben?
I have a question. Sure. You mentioned the rapid drought situation, and that can be correlated with areas of Corn Belt and other agricultural areas. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so, drought is obviously, that's a huge impact, regardless. But I think while so much work has been done on drought and its impacts, we still, because we don't understand the whole local to global water and energy cycles to the degree that we do now because of increased data sets, I think there's beginning to be a realization that not all droughts are equal. I think we kind of know that anyways. So there are these droughts that rapidly intensify and may not even be forced by some of these larger scale features like sea surface temperature anomalies in the middle of the Pacific or something else along those lines. So these are features, and so there's been kind of in the climatology, subseasonal, seasonal climatology, there's been kind of an emphasis now that there are some types of droughts that just develop very rapidly. And the 2012 drought of in the central United States is a good example, but it's not the only one. I mean, we had 2017 in the upper plains in North and South Dakota and eastern Montana. You had the southeast drought in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina recently. That happened as well. You have South Central drought in 2015. While some places were getting exceptionally wet, some were having rapid development of drought. So the whole concept of flash drought is that you can, especially in the growing season and in the warm season, with enhanced evaporative stress, because it's hot and increased solar radiation, and actually an ecological feedback, you can have these rapid droughts develop in these areas. Now, we're actually working with a team of folks to try and understand these features, including folks from the USDA. In fact, right here in Greenbelt, Maryland, there's some of those folks that are working on that. And also part of that is we're not just trying to look at these individual cases, because I think that's where the initial interest came from, is that there are individual cases that why is this one different than this one? What we're beginning to see is we can actually have some predictability of these. And not just here in the U.S., we're actually working on a global analysis of places that are most susceptible to flash drought because, especially when these happen in vulnerable populations that are subsistence, like Syria, this can actually happen in a way that begins. Flash drought can happen at the front end and perpetuates into a long-term drought that then has bigger societal impacts that we are still seeing today. There's actually evidence that the drought in the Middle East and Syria that we are all familiar with in terms of its impacts at this point actually began as a flash drought. We have seen where there's been flash drought in Russia, in which because of flash drought, when it happened in central Russia, it impacted their wheat production, which then they shut off wheat exports to places like Egypt and the Middle East, which then led to increased prices for those types of commodities, which then led to the Arab Spring. These are high impact events. So we're interested in how these things are unfolding, not just locally, but globally, because these rapidly developed drought cases can have big impacts, both local and global. Does that hopefully answer that question? Yes?
Can you comment, and I say up the front there, commented a bit about this previously. So we're learning about the dipole pathway and the frequency,
Right.
In
So,
terms of all else eat like crop insurance, which is kind of like an all or nothing, or the premium could go up, or should farmers just, as you said, or somebody said, prepare for drought all the time?
yeah. So
Because it isn't just drought.
I'm thankful, actually. I think you pointed out that I had some success and that all these are tied together, right? You have high intensity rainfall, rapid development of drought, and then the impacts of those things, and in a changing environment. And it's not, let me just also point out, I work in the Great Plains, but some of these things are happening in a lot of different places, and I think we all understand that, and it has impacts to everybody that's up here. I'm not sure I have the best news for you, because until we understand all the dynamics that are at play here that are increasing the frequency, it's one thing to, we know that if we continue business as usual in the RCP 8.5, that's having an impact globally. But then these are realized locally, right? And in somebody else's backyard. And these big picture temperatures warming, precipitation may go up in one area versus another, often gets masked by the fact that what we see is a lot of these happen at smaller time scales, and these impacts of these features. For example, you can have a general trend of increased warming, and yet in there is all sorts of high frequency noise, and yet each one of those is correlated probably with a dipole if it's precipitation, right? And all those are high impact events. But I think we do. We've got to have a better message, just like the last speaker said. We've got to change our message to some degree, that it's not just that the fact that the planet might be warming or some places might get more precipitation than others. We're going to have these high impact events embedded with these, and they're going to be happening with increased frequency. And I think what's interesting is when I talk to the agricultural producers in our area, they know it. I don't have to explain it to them because they experience it. Like Corey said, massive wildfires and these subseasonal changes of excessive precipitation in the warm season, and then it dries in the cool season. They get these fires, and then it's all great again. And back in the warm season, then the biomass grows, and then you get another fire the next year. They see these things happening in real time right now in their regions. But getting to the predictability to be able to point out these subseasonal scales, I'll let you in on a little secret. It's not the weather predictability that's bad, although I get told that all the time, right? What job can you have where you lie to the public all the time and still get paid, right? That's what I get every day. Although I like the climate people because they get a lot of flack lately, right? But their predictions are actually seem to be pretty good right now. So it's not the short scales, it's not the long-term scales, it's the intermediate right now, because the focus has been on those two. But we know that these subseasonal to seasonal issues are growing, and that's where the least amount of research has been. And there's real emphasis right now to bridge that gap, grow it from the weather side up and the climate side down, and meet in the middle, and try to increase that predictability, because we can't address those issues until we get better science in those areas. And that's where the least amount of predictability is in those ranges.
You have the last question here. We don't have any other time.
So I appreciate those comments. I mean, they're really good. But from a practical side, sort of broadly speaking, we don't need perfect weather predictions. We need incrementally better weather predictions. So better tomorrow, or better this tomorrow afternoon when we cut the grass or make hay. And next week would be nice to have. The next 2 weeks would be nice to have. So it's incremental, and the more information we have incrementally, the much better job we can do to manage the inputs and to make good decisions. And that's absolutely lacking in expert systems and so on. At least in Canada for sure, and I think it could be proven in the US too.
Yeah, and I think we stand at a place right now in terms of a big data from a weather and environmental standpoint. We have more information than we've ever had before, and effectively getting it from here to there is a massive challenge. There's reasons why companies like IBM bought the weather company, to be able to get weather information into the hands of those who need it. And I think I think you're right, absolutely. I think actually the forecasts have been better, but it's actually getting that information into the hands of those who need it most is where the gap is at this particular point in time. So I think the incremental forecasts are getting better, but somehow we have to do a better job of getting that from one area to the other. That's just an opinion. Don't tell my employer.
I'd like to thank you for participating in the symposium. I'd like to echo again to thank our